I would like to wrap up our workshop day with a video that was made by some of our students. We really struggled to get somebody to talk about climate change and the wildlife point of view. We said, could you look at different taxa that have been either positively impacted or negatively impacted by climate change? They didn't want to present it, so they recorded it. Okay, so I've seen the slideshow, but this is the first time I've seen the presentation, so this will be interesting for me too.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Envirothon. My name is Jordan Lucas. I'm a student worker at EIH, and today I'm going to be talking to you about climate change impacts on wildlife, plants, and microbes, specifically centered around the state of Texas. Let's get into it. Climate change is the term used to describe the recent and projected shifts in global climate as a result of increasing average global temperature. These increasing temperatures are strongly linked to anthropogenic activities, primarily the use of fossil fuels and their release of greenhouse gases, as well as the proliferation of pollutants into the environment. If you look at the figure on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the directly proportional relationship between carbon dioxide and global temperature rising at an exponential rate from the year 1880 to 2017. The global temperature has been raised 1.2 degrees Celsius within this span of time. Greenhouse gases trap the heat from the sun in our atmosphere, leading to expedited increases in global average temperature. Examples of greenhouse gases affecting our atmosphere are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases. The figures on the right-hand side of the screen show all of the sources of carbon dioxide emissions, methane emissions, nitrous oxide emissions, and fluorinated gas emissions. The leading cause of carbon dioxide emissions can be linked back to transportation. The leading cause of methane emissions is related to natural gas and petroleum systems. Nitrous oxide emissions leading cause is agricultural soil management, and fluorinated gas emissions leading cause is the substitution of ozone-depleting substances. Here we can see illustrated the greenhouse effect with normal carbon dioxide being compared to rampant carbon dioxide. It's evident that normal carbon dioxide allows more heat to escape from our atmosphere back into outer space, whereas rampant carbon dioxide has a decreased amount of heat that is able to escape back into outer space, therefore staying within our atmosphere and raising the global temperature. Let's talk about ocean acidification. The oceans experience abiotic stress in the form of acidification as carbon dioxide is dissolved into the ocean. The greater the amount of carbon dioxide that is dissolved, the lower the pH of the ocean will become. These abiotic stresses have both harmful and beneficial impacts on the taxa within these environments, depending on which particular species is being observed. Global climate and fire trends. Over the 20th century, global temperature significantly increased on 76% of land, precipitation significantly increased on 28% of land, and decreased on 2%, and global average fire increased. Global circulation models project temperature increases of 2.4 to 4.0 degrees Celsius, further precipitation changes, and increased rates of wildfires over a third of global land. Using the MC1 dynamic global vegetation model on 9 GCM emission scenario combinations, Gonzalez et al. Found possibly extensive changes to biomes around the world. While different GCM emission scenarios project variations in biome changes, areas where GCM emission scenario project the same change in biomes exhibit a higher confidence in projections. Let's talk about some impacts on wildlife within Kingdom Animalia. Our first example is going to be Octopus maya. This species is positively affected by climate change. Maya octopus are found in the Gulf of Mexico. Maya octopi are found in the Gulf of Mexico. In 1980, 8,000 individual Maya octopi were caught on average per year. By the year 1990, 19,000 individuals were caught on average per year under the same conditions during octopus season. Increased temperatures in the Gulf seem to be decreasing populations of predators of O. maya, allowing the octopi to flourish. Another positively impacted species native to Texas is the white-tailed deer. These can be seen all over the UHCL campus, as well as all over Texas. They're very dear to our hearts. Increased temperatures lead to the shorter winters, which promotes range expansion in the white-tailed deer. Historically, winter begets energy depletion in this species by forcing them to use fat reserves to lactate and reproduce. Range expansion will likely push the deer into urban and developed areas, which could be a problem for humans, since the deer will likely start to interact with us within cities and will become a hazard for roads. There is a 7.27-fold increase in odds of white-tailed deer presence. Our third positive impact in Kingdom Animalia goes to the Plantae warbler. This warbler species, which migrates to bottomwood forests and swampy areas to reproduce, has an observed increase in its capability for reproduction correlated with rising April temperatures. Continued global warming may upset the warbler's migratory and feeding patterns. The study linked below was a 20-year-long observation of the reproductive habits of the Plantae warblers. On average, 155 individual females were observed each year, and the frequency at which they produced 2 broods was recorded. It was discovered that the date of the first egg laying became earlier as temperatures became warmer. This was most typically observed in older warbler females, while 1-year-old individuals did not appear to be affected by the temperature changes. Surprisingly, the arrival dates for migrating warblers were not impacted by temperature changes, and the earlier egg laying does not appear to be creating mismatch between warbler populations and food sources. Let's talk about some negatively impacted species in Kingdom Animalia. This slide is going to be talking about Leptonicterus nivalis, also known as the Mexican long-nosed bat. The Mexican long-nosed bat was labeled endangered in the year 1988. This species is greatly threatened by the loss of agave bloom sites from climate change along their migratory route. A loss of at least 75% of this species and their agave bloom sites is projected within the next 50 years. Also negatively impacted would be the whooping crane. This large shorebird has only one winter home, the Aransas National Wildlife Refuge. This area is expected to experience disproportionately high sea level rise in the wake of unfettered climate change. The loss of wetlands, as well as rising temperatures and decreasing salinity, reducing food sources, may be enough to take away the only winter home of the whooping crane. Whooping cranes have a long storied history in the context of ecology. In 1941, there were less than 40 individuals migrating to the winter holdout in Aransas. Today, over 500 migrating birds are accounted for, but the preservation efforts of this bird risk coming unfurled in the wake of climate change. As temperatures rise, so too will sea levels. This is expected to reduce the suitable hunting habitats for whooping cranes by 50%. Beyond that, the food sources themselves will be greatly reduced, as reduced salinity in the Aransas area will diminish the ability of the blue crab to reproduce and survive in the hunting grounds. Whooping cranes primarily feed on blue crabs, so that's bad news for these birds. Let's talk about the blue crab. This species is a critical food source for several predator species, including the whooping crane, as previously mentioned. While increased temperatures may have some capacity for benefiting blue crabs in northern areas and southern habitats, rising sea levels in the wake of elevated temperatures are expected to decrease salinity, which will impair the blue crab's capacity for reproduction. Some literature has suggested that the blue crab may benefit from rising global temperatures, primarily populations in the north, such as Chesapeake Bay. But when looking south, we see more grim prospects. The blue crab is highly sensitive to salinity ranges, primarily because it influences where the different sexes of crabs settle, and therefore impacts the capacity of the crab to reproduce. As sea levels rise in the south, salinity is expected to drop out of the sufficient range for the blue crab, and it will no longer be able to reside in these areas. Also negatively affected would be the Kemp's Ridley sea turtles, which are actually the smallest sea turtles in the world. The species was listed as endangered in 1970 and are considered critically endangered today. Increased global temperatures decreases the nesting success of these turtles, producing mainly female offspring and limiting reproductive opportunities. Moving on to kingdom Plantae, we see that one positively impacted species is the water hyacinth. Water hyacinth is an invasive plant in Texas. Research has demonstrated the strong potential of rising winter temperatures to bolster the water hyacinth's survivability, growth, competition, and capacity for geographic expansion. The plant is well suited to warm climates, and this means that in a hotter future, this plant may experience an even easier time proliferating. Being an invasive species, this may yield serious consequences for overall ecological health as the playing field shifts more and more in the face of rising global temperatures. One positive that could come from this development, though, is the increased viability of water hyacinth as a remediation tool. This plant has documented use as a phytoremediator of heavy metals, and if it is able to more easily survive winter periods, we may be able to reap some benefits from an otherwise problematic scenario. A negatively impacted species of plant is the agave species. Climate change reduces bloom sites and delays the flowering season, causing a mismatch in time frame with the activity of its pollinator, Leptonectaris nivalis. Plant pollinator mutualisms with the Mexican long-nosed bat and the agave species are threatened greatly by climate change. Agave is limited in unassisted seed dispersal and auto-reproduction, causing a disaggregation risk. Some socioeconomic risks of the declining population of the agave is the tequila, mezcal, and agave industries. This could cause prices to exponentially increase or completely shut the industry down, causing the downfall of a multi-billion-dollar industry and all of the jobs that are supplied by it. Let's talk about composition changes in microbiomes. This graphic illustrates the ways in which microbes, bacteria, and fungi can either flourish or diminish in the presence of climate change induced by abiotic stressors. This graphic serves as a quick overview of the issues in microbiome diversity that we expect to face as a consequence of climate change. If you observe the center graphic, a typical microbiome composition is displayed. Then, if you look at any of the surrounding graphics on the perimeter, you can see the drastic shifts that will occur in each particular scenario. Microbiomes can be very sensitive, and their composition is important as individual actors in a community can, and usually do, rely on one another. If these microbiomes become unhealthy, then that will spell serious consequences for the plant life that rely on them, and eventually the other organisms that rely on the success of those plants. An example of a positively impacted species in kingdom bacteria can be found in fecal coliforms. Fecal coliforms are a bacteria group found within feces and are harmful to both humans and animals. It has already benefited from increasing sea levels and is expected to see its capacity for proliferation continue to increase through the end of the century as a result of climate change. An example of a fecal coliform is E. coli. The issue with fecal bacteria is pretty straightforward. As sea levels rise and encroach on the living spaces of people and water flow characteristics are altered, the capacity for proliferation of fecal bacteria is greatly increased. We have already observed the consequences of this, as there have been more incidents recently in populated areas like California beaches, in which fecal bacteria causes illness to spread in communities. One negatively impacted species in kingdom bacteria can be seen in methanotropes. Methanotropic bacteria, which resides most typically in soil, oxidizes methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas, from the atmosphere, or can serve as biofilters for methane in anaerobic environments. These microbes may see their capacity for interaction with methane, as well as their general biodiversity, reduced in the presence of elevated inorganic nitrogen, a long-term symptom of the drying effects of elevated temperatures. Methanotropes are very important cogs in the machine for the ecosystem. These bacteria can, through multiple avenues of action, remove methane from the environment. This is very important, as mitigating the presence of methane is an important function for soil health, but also because methane is a potent greenhouse gas. Unfortunately, literature has suggested that elevated inorganic nitrogen in the soil inhibits some forms of bacteria from being able to filter out methane from the environment, and this elevation of nitrogen will become more common in the face of elevated temperatures and dried out soil. Let's talk about a positive impact on the kingdom fungi. Global climate change may have a profound impact on distribution of toxigenic fungi growth and production of aflatoxins in grain and ground nuts. Increased human dietary exposure leads to health concerns such as increased rates of liver cancer and hepatitis infections. Zhu et al. Found in Bexar County and Lubbock County, Texas, a significant increase in aflatoxin detection over a 10-year observation period from 2004 to 2014. Thank you guys so much for watching this video today. I hope that you could all have some kind of educational takeaway from this presentation, and I hope you have fun at the Envirothon. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sure you agree with me that they did a great job on that.
Did Larissa have a question somewhere I saw, or a comment?
I think I missed the very beginning of it. So when they were talking about positive and negative, I guess
Yes.
it's just, well, I guess what I was wondering about was, especially with the octopus and the way, and then the warbler and the deer, like I just was wondering if they had measured them pre-urban growth, like if any of those populations were actually returning to where they used to be.
Well, unfortunately, they're not online to answer that question. I don't know. And I think they did outline with a lot of their other examples that just because it's a positive for the species doesn't mean it's a positive for the entire ecosystem. And just because it's a negative for the species could be a negative for the entire ecosystem or maybe not. So it really does depend on how things within that ecosystem interconnect with each other. But I think the takeaway is things change and we can't always predict how they change.